My name is Lorraine, and I'm 62 years old. For most of my life, I worked as a nurse in a small Michigan hospital. I was proud of the work I did, helping others, comforting the sick, and bringing a little light into people's darkest days. But after my husband Harold passed away 3 years ago, that light dimmed in me. The house felt too quiet, the mornings too long, and my evenings far lonelier than I ever expected. My one source of joy, the one thing that kept me smiling, was my son Tyler and his two beautiful children Noah, who was 6, and Ellie, just 4 years old. They were my world. When Harold was alive, we doted on Tyler endlessly. He wasn't spoiled, but he was loved deeply, maybe even too deeply. We always believed love could fix anything. After Harold's passing, I threw myself into being the best grandmother I could be. Every weekend, I'd bake cookies, buy little toys, and plan small outings for the kids. Their laughter filled the silence Harold had left behind. But all that changed when Tyler remarried. Candace, his new wife, was beautiful, I'll admit that. She had striking features, perfectly manicured nails, and always wore designer clothes. But behind her polished smile was something cold. From the first time we met, I could tell she didn't like me. She barely looked at me during conversations and often interrupted when I spoke to Tyler. I tried to brush it off, telling myself she just needed time to adjust to being part of our family. At first, she simply made excuses when I asked to visit the children. "Oh, they're busy today," or "they already have plans." Slowly, weeks turned into months. I noticed the kids weren't coming by anymore. I called Tyler often, but our conversations grew shorter and colder. He always seemed distracted, as if talking to me was some sort of chore. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to take the initiative and called Tyler to ask if I could pick up the kids for a day at the park. His tone was strange, distant. "Mom," he said, clearing his throat, "we've been meaning to talk to you about something." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "About what, sweetheart?" I asked. He hesitated, then continued, "Candace and I have been having some financial issues. She's been saying it's not really fair that you get to spend so much time with the kids without, helping out." I frowned. "Helping out? What do you mean?" He sighed. "Well, she feels that since you're retired, you could contribute something. Maybe help with some expenses. She thinks $200 a week would be reasonable." For a second, I didn't understand what I'd just heard. $200 a week. To see my grandkids? My heart thudded painfully. "Tyler, are you saying you want me to pay you to see Noah and Ellie?" There was a pause. "Mom, don't make it sound like that. It's not about money, it's just, fairness." "Fairness?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Since when is love measured in dollars, Tyler?" He muttered something under his breath about Candace being right, and that it's just how things are now. I felt dizzy. This was my own son, the same boy Harold and I had raised with every ounce of love we had. I'd given up sleep, comfort, and time so he could have a good life. And now, he was asking me to pay for the privilege of seeing his children. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chairs that once held laughter and warmth. I thought about Harold, what he'd say if he could see this. He'd probably shake his head, his kind eyes filled with disappointment, and say something wise about greed and love. I tried to convince myself that Tyler was under pressure, that maybe Candace had twisted things in his mind. But deep down, I knew he wasn't just following her lead. He'd chosen this. He'd chosen money over family. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Noah's little hands gripping mine, Ellie's giggles echoing in the park, and Tyler's voice demanding money from me. The betrayal ran deep. I poured myself a cup of tea, the clock ticking quietly in the background. I thought about all the times Harold used to joke, "Lorraine, never let anyone put a price on your heart." I used to laugh then. But now those words cut straight through me. In the following days, I received no calls, no texts, nothing. It was as if I'd been erased from their lives. The silence hurt more than any argument ever could. I would walk by the children's old bedrooms, still filled with toys and their little drawings, and feel the ache of loss all over again. I tried to distract myself by volunteering at the local community center, but every smiling child reminded me of Noah and Ellie. I'd force a smile, pretending everything was fine, but my heart was heavy. As much as it pained me, I knew one thing for certain. I would never, ever pay to see my grandchildren. But I also wasn't ready to let this end with me being the victim. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, realizing my son had just turned my love for my grandchildren into a business transaction. I couldn't sleep that night, haunted by Tyler's words echoing in my mind. Every time I shut my eyes, I heard him saying it again, cold, practical, and distant. $200 a week, Mom. It wasn't a request. It was a condition. And the worst part was how normal he'd sounded while saying it, as if this was something families did all the time. The next morning, the sunlight felt cruel, too bright for the way I felt inside. I sat by the kitchen window, watching the steam rise from my coffee, trying to make sense of it all. Where had I gone wrong? Harold and I hadn't been perfect parents, but we'd given Tyler everything we could love. Stability. Lessons about kindness and integrity. I thought we'd raised him to understand the difference between wanting and taking. But maybe I'd been blind. All day I fought with myself. Part of me wanted to call and tell him off, tell him how disgusting it was to treat his own mother that way. The other part of me still clung to hope. Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe Candace had pushed him into it. I tried to believe the boy I raised was still in there somewhere, buried under her influence. So I called him. My hands trembled as I dialed his number. When Candace answered, her voice was clipped and sharp. "Oh, Lorraine," she said, pretending to sound polite. "I was wondering when you'd call." "I'd like to talk to Tyler," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's busy," she replied. "But I can pass along a message. I'd like to see the kids," I told her. "Just for a little while. Maybe I can take them for ice cream." There was a long pause, then a small laugh. "It's simple. Lorraine, 200 a week, or you don't see them." Something in me snapped. "They're my grandchildren. Not a service I'm paying for," I said, my voice rising. "Well," she said with a smug little hum, "we all have to make sacrifices." And then she hung up. I sat there staring at the phone, the dial tone humming like a cruel joke. For the first time in my life, I felt something dark, something close to hatred. Not just for Candace, but for what she'd done to Tyler. Or maybe for what Tyler had allowed her to do. The rest of that day was a blur. I walked around the house in silence, touching the family photos that lined the walls. There was one of Tyler on his high school graduation day, Harold's arm around him, both smiling wide. I touched the glass and whispered, "What happened to you, baby boy?" I took out the photo albums I hadn't opened in years. Page after page, I saw the story of our family, the trips to the lake, the birthday parties, the Christmas mornings where Tyler tore through wrapping paper with joy in his eyes. And then the more recent pictures, Noah in his dinosaur pajamas, Ellie with frosting on her cheeks after baking cookies with me. They were more than photos. They were proof of love, real love. The kind money couldn't measure. By evening, my tears had dried. I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolved. There was no way I would give Candace what she wanted, but I wasn't about to let her think she'd won either. I wasn't some fragile old woman who could be pushed aside. The next few days, I avoided calling them. I needed time to think, to figure out what came next. That's when I started noticing things I hadn't before. I ran into an old neighbor, Denise, at the grocery store. She used to live near Tyler's house and mentioned she'd seen some tension between him and Candace. "They argue a lot," she whispered. "Money problems, I think. Money. It always came back to that." When I got home, I sat in Harold's old recliner, holding one of his sweaters against my chest. The scent of him still lingered faintly, and it brought me a strange comfort. Harold had always known how to handle difficult situations. He used to say, "Lorraine, sometimes you don't need to fight fire with fire. You just need to let people burn themselves out." Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't need to argue or plead. Maybe I just needed to let this play out and be ready when it did. That night, I opened my diary for the first time in years and began writing everything down. The conversation, Candace's words, the way Tyler sounded. I didn't know why, but something inside told me to keep a record. Maybe it was just my way of processing, or maybe I sensed that this wasn't over. Days turned into weeks, and the silence from Tyler grew louder. I didn't hear from him or the kids. The only connection I had left to them was the small drawing Ellie had made me last Christmas, a heart with "I love you, Grandma" written in wobbly letters. I framed it and placed it on my nightstand. Every morning, I'd touch the glass and whisper, "I love you too." I wasn't sure what my next step would be, but I knew I had to take one. I couldn't just sit back and let greed tear my family apart. Somewhere deep in my chest, the fire that had dimmed after Harold's death started to flicker again. I wasn't done fighting, not yet. That's when I began to plan something that would make both Tyler and Candace realize what they'd truly lost. I was sipping tea when the idea came to me like a whisper from Harold himself. It was a quiet Sunday morning. The kind of morning Harold used to love, the faint sound of church bells drifting through the window, sunlight spilling across the table, the smell of fresh coffee filling the kitchen. But that day, everything felt heavier. My mind wouldn't stop circling back to the same question. How could my own son put a price on love? I stared at the stack of unopened mail sitting by the fruit bowl. Bills, catalogs, charity letters, just paper. But suddenly, paper didn't seem so meaningless. I thought of the last letter Harold had written me before his surgery, the one he'd hidden in my bedside drawer. He'd written, "Lorraine, if you ever find yourself lost in a storm, remember, love is your compass. Use it wisely, even when others don't deserve it." Those words were echoing in my mind when the idea hit me. I nearly dropped my teacup. Harold had left behind a trust fund when he passed, a modest one, but still sizable enough to matter. Tyler didn't know all the details. He assumed he'd inherit everything automatically one day. But what he didn't realize was that Harold had placed the fund under my control until my death. It wasn't something I ever flaunted, but suddenly, that detail took on new meaning. I set my cup down and whispered, "Maybe it's time you learned the value of what you're so desperate for, Tyler." It wasn't revenge I wanted, not really. I wanted him to see what greed could cost him. I wanted him to understand that you can't buy love, that you can't blackmail your way into someone's heart. Harold used to tell me, "Money's just a mirror, it shows people who they really are." I guess it was time to hold up that mirror. The next day, I drove to the bank. The clerk recognized me, Mrs. Reeves, a kind woman who'd known Harold well. I told her I needed a few official envelopes and a notary stamp for a personal document. She didn't ask many questions, just smiled and said, "Of course, Mrs. Whitaker." As I signed my name on the paperwork, I could almost hear Harold's laugh in my head. He would have been proud of me for standing up, for finding a quiet kind of strength. I wasn't going to yell or threaten. I was going to let truth and maybe a little irony do the talking. That night, I sat at my desk with a blank sheet of paper and began to write. "Dear Tyler and Candace, I've thought about your offer, and I've decided to agree to your terms. I'll provide financial assistance in exchange for time with Noah and Ellie. Everything you asked for is inside this envelope." It felt strange writing those words, but I smiled as I sealed the envelope because I knew what else I was going to include. Inside, I placed a crisp check for $1, and beneath it, I tucked a letter written years ago in Harold's handwriting. It was a note he'd left for Tyler after his college graduation. I had kept it in a box of keepsakes all this time. The letter said, "Son, life will test your values. Money will tempt you, pride will blind you, but love, real love, will always be your greatest wealth. Never trade it for anything less." I read it twice before sliding it into the envelope. The irony wasn't lost on me. Candace wanted money. Tyler wanted control. What they were about to get instead was a message from the man who'd loved them both the most. I stared at the sealed envelope for a long time before I slipped it into my purse. It looked so ordinary, so harmless. But inside that simple piece of paper was the truth they both needed to face. The following morning, I rehearsed what I would say when I handed it to them. I didn't want anger to cloud my voice. I wanted calm, steady conviction, something that would make my words stick. I practiced in the mirror, the way Harold used to before giving a speech at work. "You wanted money," I murmured to my reflection. But what you really need is a reminder of what matters. By evening, the nerves began to creep in. My hands trembled slightly as I cooked myself a small dinner. I could feel my heart pounding, not from fear but anticipation. I wasn't sure how they would react. Shock, anger, maybe even humiliation, but it didn't matter anymore. This wasn't about pleasing them, it was about reclaiming my dignity. Before bed, I took out one of Harold's old cufflinks from his drawer and held it in my palm. "Wish me luck, darling," I whispered. "I'm about to teach our boy a lesson you would have been proud of." The next morning, I woke up early, dressed neatly, and brushed my hair the way Harold always said he liked it, soft waves over my shoulders. I looked in the mirror and saw not a grieving widow, not a broken mother, but a woman ready to take back control of her story. I placed the envelope carefully in my handbag, zipped it shut, and took a deep breath. The house was still, the air filled with quiet determination. As I slid the envelope into my purse, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I was ready to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. The next Saturday, I drove to Tyler's house, clutching the envelope like a loaded weapon. The morning air was cold, sharper than usual, and the sky hung heavy with gray clouds. I remember thinking how fitting that was. Everything about that day felt weighted, tense, inevitable. The drive to Insopper first in Leafinator, Tyler's house felt longer than usual. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they should have, and I kept glancing at the passenger seat where my purse rested, the edge of the white envelope peeking out like a secret waiting to be revealed. Their house sat in one of those new suburban developments, neat lawns, identical driveways, and a false sense of perfection. Candace had always loved appearances. When I parked in front of their house, I noticed a new SUV in the driveway, shiny and spotless, even though Tyler had told me they were having money problems. I almost laughed. I took a deep breath, fixed my coat, and rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door opened, and there she was, Candace. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, that familiar tight smile plastered across her face. "Lorraine," she said, her tone sugary but cold. "Didn't expect to see you today." I smiled politely. "I wanted to talk to you both. Is Tyler home?" She hesitated, probably wondering what I was doing there unannounced, but then she stepped aside. "Sure, come in." As I walked into the living room, I noticed the place was spotless, almost sterile. No toys on the floor, no signs of the children anywhere. Just expensive furniture and a faint smell of perfume. Tyler came out from the kitchen, his expression unreadable. "Mom," he said quietly. "What are you doing here?" "I came to give you something," I said, keeping my tone calm. "You asked for help, and I've thought it over." Candace's eyes lit up slightly. "Oh? So you've decided to contribute?" I nodded slowly and reached into my purse. "Everything you asked for is inside this envelope." I handed it to Tyler. He stared at it for a moment, confusion flickering across his face before Candace snatched it from his hands. "Well," she said, grinning, "it's about time." She tore the flap open without hesitation, clearly expecting a stack of cash or a check that would make her feel victorious. I sat down on their couch, folding my hands neatly in my lap, watching silently. I'd prepared myself for this moment, the moment when reality would hit. Candace pulled out the contents and froze. A single check fluttered onto the coffee table. Tyler leaned forward, squinting. "Is this?" Candace's voice cut through the air. $1? She hissed. "You're kidding, right?" Tyler picked up the second page, the letter in Harold's handwriting. I could see his hands tremble slightly as he read the opening line. "Son, if greed ever blinds you, remember that love cannot be bought." He kept reading, his face shifting from confusion to recognition, then shame. Harold's name signed at the bottom hit him like a punch. Candace, on the other hand, was fuming. "What kind of sick joke is this?" she snapped, slamming the check on the table. "You think this is funny?" I looked at her evenly. "No, Candace, I think it's tragic. You wanted to sell time with my grandchildren. I thought it was only fair to pay what love is truly worth, $1. Her cheeks flushed red, her jaw tightening. "You're unbelievable." Tyler finally looked up from the letter. His eyes were wet, though he tried to hide it. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. "It was your father's," I said softly. "He wrote it for you years ago. I kept it because I thought you'd need it someday. I just never imagined it would be like this." For a few seconds, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of a wall clock. Candace's face twisted with rage as she turned to Tyler. "You're not seriously going to let her embarrass us like this, are you?" Tyler didn't answer. He just stared at the letter, his lips pressed tightly together. I stood up, adjusting my coat. "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to remind you both that family isn't a business. You may not want me in your lives, but I'll never stop loving Noah and Ellie. That's something no money can ever buy." Candace scoffed, crossing her arms. "You really think you're some kind of saint, don't you? You're pathetic." Her words stung, but I didn't let her see it. I simply smiled, the kind of calm, tired smile that comes from having nothing left to prove. "Maybe," I said softly. "But at least I can look in the mirror without shame." I turned to leave, my heart pounding but steady. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard Tyler's voice behind me, quiet, broken. "Mom, wait." I stopped but didn't turn around. "I didn't know Dad wrote that letter," he said. I didn't remember how much he tried to teach me. My throat tightened, but I didn't speak. I just nodded once, a small acknowledgement that maybe, somewhere in him, a part of that boy I'd raised was still alive. Candace's voice broke the moment. "Don't fall for this guilt trip, Tyler," she snapped. "She's manipulating you." He didn't answer her. The silence between them said more than words ever could. I stepped outside into the cool air, the wind biting at my cheeks. I stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling both heavy and strangely free. The sky above was still gray. But I felt something shifting inside me, a quiet strength, a certainty that I'd done the right thing. But Tyler's reaction wasn't what I expected. He stormed out of the room, and I knew this was only the beginning. Tyler didn't call me for a week after the envelope incident. 7 long days of silence, no phone calls, no texts, nothing. Each day that passed, I checked my phone more times than I'd like to admit, hoping for some kind of message, even if it was angry. But there was nothing, just the empty hum of quiet that filled my house. I tried to convince myself that maybe the silence meant he was thinking about it, that the letter from Harold had struck something deep inside him. Maybe he needed time to process. But deep down, I knew my son's pride ran thick. If there was one thing Tyler couldn't stand, it was feeling embarrassed. And Candace? She would never allow him to back down, not after being humiliated. On the 8th day, I finally got what I was waiting for. My phone buzzed while I was folding laundry. When I saw Tyler's name on the screen, my hands froze. My heart lifted for a split second until I read the message. "You humiliated me, Mom. Don't contact us again." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just a wall of finality that shattered me. I sank into my chair, my body trembling. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, staring at those words until they blurred into nothing. When the tears finally came, they weren't gentle. They came in waves, years of pain and disappointment flooding out all at once. I cried for Harold, for the family we used to be, for the children who wouldn't understand why Grandma suddenly disappeared from their lives. But when the crying stopped, something shifted. I wasn't weak anymore. The pain hardened into resolve. Tyler could cut me off, but I wouldn't stop loving my grandchildren. I couldn't. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg, but I wasn't going to vanish either. I needed to see Noah and Ellie, even if it was from a distance. So the next afternoon, I drove to their school just before dismissal. I parked far enough away not to be noticed and waited. When the bell rang, children poured out, their laughter filling the air. Then I saw them: Noah, with his messy hair and bright blue backpack, and Ellie, holding his hand, wearing her little pink jacket. My throat tightened. They looked happy, innocent, untouched by the ugliness their parents were spreading. I didn't approach them. I couldn't risk a scene. I just watched from afar, smiling through tears as they climbed into Tyler's car. It broke my heart to see them go, but for those few minutes, I'd felt connected again. When I got home, I opened my journal, the one I'd started after the phone call with Candace, and began writing. Every date. Every message. Every cruel word. I didn't know what I was collecting this information for, but something told me it might matter someday. Maybe I needed proof, or maybe I just needed to preserve the truth somewhere. A few days later, I heard from my neighbor Denise again. She'd seen Candace at a local boutique, arguing loudly with a clerk about a declined credit card. She looked furious, Denise said, lowering her voice. I think things aren't going so well for them. I didn't say it aloud, but the thought crossed my mind immediately. Maybe their perfect little world was starting to crack. And while I took no joy in that, I couldn't ignore the feeling that karma was finally stretching its legs. Still, I kept my distance. I spent my days volunteering, cooking small meals, and filling the quiet hours with memories. But every time I passed the family photos on the wall, that ache returned. There was Tyler as a boy, holding Harold's hand. There he was on graduation day, grinning with pride. And now, that same boy had turned his back on me for money. One evening, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat out on the porch. The sun was setting, and the air was cool. I thought of Harold again, how steady he'd been, how he always found a way to see through anger into truth. He'd tell me not to lose hope, I murmured to myself. He'd tell me love always wins in the end. I wanted to believe that. I truly did. A few nights later, I was halfway through a book when my phone buzzed again. The number was unfamiliar. I hesitated before answering. Hello? There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then a voice, shaky, tired, uncertain. Mom? My heart skipped a beat. Tyler? He exhaled heavily. Yeah, I need to talk to you. I didn't say anything at first. My mind raced, wondering if this was another setup, another manipulation. But something in his tone so raw, so broken made me listen. Candace and I, he began, his voice cracking. She left, took her things and the kids' savings. She said she was done. I sat there frozen, my breath catching. Oh, Tyler, I whispered. She said I ruined everything, that I was weak, that I couldn't even handle my own mother. His voice trembled. I don't know what to do, Mom. A long silence followed. I wanted to comfort him, but I also remembered the pain, the humiliation. My mind battled between a mother's instinct and a woman's wounded pride. Finally, I said softly, Tyler, if you're ready to talk honestly, I'll listen. But I won't be manipulated again. He sniffled. I know. I need to make things right. I looked up at the night sky. The stars faint above the darkness. Maybe, just maybe, Harold had been right after all. Then I got a call from an unknown number that would reopen the door. I thought they'd slammed shut forever. The voice on the phone was shaky. It was Tyler. For a few seconds, I couldn't find my voice. I sat there gripping the phone, my heart pounding as his words sank in. The silence between us was thick, filled with things we hadn't said in months. Finally, I took a slow breath. Tyler, are you all right? There was a pause, then a sigh that sounded more like a sob. No, Mom, I'm not. Everything's falling apart. He told me that Candace had left 2 nights ago after a screaming match that woke the kids. Apparently, she'd been hiding credit card debt and using money meant for bills on luxury items. When Tyler found out, he confronted her. And it spiraled into a war of blame and insults. She said she was done with me, he said, his voice cracking. She said I wasn't man enough to take care of her. It was strange listening to him cry, hearing the vulnerability I hadn't heard since he was a boy. A part of me wanted to say, this is what happens when you chase money instead of love. But another part, the mother part, just wanted to hold him. Where are the kids? I asked, my throat tight. They're with me, he said. Candace packed a few bags and left. She said she'd call when she figured out what she wanted. I closed my eyes and whispered, thank God. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, but softer this time, not angry, just tired. I know I don't deserve it, he finally said. But I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Months of resentment and heartbreak collided with something older, deeper love. The kind that never really dies, no matter how much pain it endures. He asked if I would come by to see the kids, maybe help out a little. My instinct screamed to be cautious, to not fall back into the same trap, but I couldn't resist the chance to see Noah and Ellie again. "I'll come tomorrow," I said quietly. "But, Tyler, no games, no money talk. I'm coming as their grandmother, not your bank." "I understand," he said softly. "I promise." The next morning, I woke early, nerves fluttering in my stomach. I baked a batch of chocolate chip cookies, Noah's favorite, and packed a small bag of toys and books I'd kept for them. My hands shook as I tied the ribbon around the bag. I didn't know what kind of reception I'd get, but I had to go. When I pulled up to their house, it looked different, messier, quieter. The SUV was gone. Candace must have taken it. Tyler opened the door before I could knock. His eyes were puffy, and he looked exhausted. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice low. I nodded. "Hi, sweetheart." He stepped aside to let me in. And then I saw them, Noah and Ellie. The moment their little faces lit up, my heart melted. "Grandma!" they shouted, running toward me. I dropped my purse and wrapped them in my arms, breathing in their scent, their warmth. It was like sunlight breaking through weeks of darkness. Ellie held up her small hands to show me a picture she'd drawn. "This is us," she said proudly. "Daddy, me, Noah, and Grandma." I smiled through tears. "It's beautiful, baby." We spent the afternoon together coloring, playing board games, and baking cookies. For a few precious hours, it felt like the world had gone back to the way it used to be. Tyler even laughed a few times, though his eyes were haunted by guilt. When the kids went to play in the backyard, I joined him at the kitchen table. He poured us coffee and stared at the cup for a long time before speaking. "Mom, I don't know how I let things get so bad," he said quietly. "Candace. She always made me feel like I wasn't enough. I thought money would fix everything. I thought if I gave her what she wanted, she'd finally love me." I listened, my chest tight. "Tyler, love isn't something you buy. It's something you give freely, and if someone makes you pay for it, it's not love." He nodded, tears pooling in his eyes. "I see that now. I wish I'd listened to you before." I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. "It's never too late to do the right thing," I said softly. He squeezed my hand, his lip trembling. "I want to make things right, Mom. I really do." For the first time in months, it seemed like he truly understood the damage he'd done. The pain in his eyes wasn't performance, it was real. As the day turned to evening, I tucked the kids into bed, kissed their foreheads, and whispered, "Grandma's not going anywhere again." Their sleepy smiles nearly broke me. Tyler walked me to the car, thanking me for coming. For a moment, I almost told him I forgave him. But something inside me hesitated. He'd hurt me deeply, and trust doesn't rebuild overnight. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt torn. Part of me was grateful, hopeful even, that maybe this was the beginning of healing. But another part whispered a warning. My instincts told me to stay cautious, to keep listening not to his words, but to his actions. And it turns out, those instincts were right. Later that night, I overheard a phone call that shattered any trust I'd started to rebuild. I stood frozen outside Tyler's kitchen, listening to every word of his call. It was late that night, hours after I'd tucked Noah and Ellie into bed and said goodnight. I'd agreed to stay for dinner, and after we ate, I lingered a little longer to help clean up. It felt nice, almost normal, to wash dishes beside my son again. But when he excused himself to make a quick phone call, something inside me told me not to leave just yet. I don't know why. Maybe it was mother's intuition, or maybe it was because I'd been burned once before. So I waited. I quietly set down the dish towel and leaned toward the hallway, just enough to hear. His voice was low, but the tone, it wasn't remorse, it was calculation. "Yeah," he whispered into the phone. "She came over today. Everything went just like we planned." My blood ran cold. I couldn't hear the other voice, but I didn't need to. I knew. Candace, she thinks I'm alone, Tyler continued. I just need to keep her close for a bit. Once she trusts me again, I'll talk her into changing the will. Then we can both walk away for good. It felt like the ground vanished beneath my feet. My stomach turned, and I had to grip the counter to stay upright. The man speaking wasn't my son, it was someone else entirely. Someone cold, greedy, and unrecognizable. Candace's voice crackled faintly through the phone speaker. Good, don't mess this up, Tyler. Your mother's always been sentimental. Use that. Make her feel sorry for you. I wanted to burst into the room and scream. But I didn't. I couldn't. Every instinct in me told me to stay quiet to let him finish, to hear every word. He sighed. I know, I'll handle it. She still thinks I'm hurting. Once she updates the paperwork, we'll get what's ours. What's ours? The words echoed in my mind, sharp and poisonous. I backed away from the hallway, my heart thundering so loudly I was sure he'd hear it. My eyes stung with tears. But anger, hot, controlled anger, was already beginning to rise beneath them. I left quietly, slipping out the back door before he could see me. I didn't even bother to grab my coat. The cool night air hit my face like a slap, but I barely felt it. I walked to my car and sat there in silence, gripping the steering wheel with trembling hands. For a long time I didn't move. My thoughts came in fragments, images of Tyler as a baby, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, his teenage years, Harold teaching him how to fix the lawnmower, his wedding day, smiling like the whole world belonged to him. All of it felt like someone else's memories now. When I finally drove home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even pray. I just planned. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I called my lawyer. He'd been with our family for over 20 years, a kind man named Douglas Reeves, who'd handled Harold's estate and the children's trust paperwork. Douglas, I said calmly, I need to update my will immediately. He hesitated. Is everything all right, Mrs. Whitaker? No, I replied, steady but firm. But it will be. We met that afternoon in his office. I told him everything, how Tyler and Candace had demanded money, the envelope, and now, this latest betrayal. Douglas's face darkened with concern. That's awful, he said softly. I'm sorry you're going through this. I'm not asking for pity, I said. I'm asking for protection. I want everything, legally airtight. He nodded. What changes do you want to make? I took a deep breath. Remove Tyler from my will entirely. I want every asset, every account, everything I own placed into a trust for Noah and Ellie. They'll inherit when they turn 18 and not a day before. Douglas raised an eyebrow. Are you sure about this? It's a big decision. I met his eyes. I've never been more sure of anything. He started typing. And the trustee? My friend Jean, I said without hesitation. Jean had been my closest confidant for decades. A woman with integrity and strength. She'll oversee it all. I trust her with my life. When he finished, he slid the documents across the desk. It's done, he said. Once you sign, it's final. I picked up the pen and stared at the line where my name would go. My hand didn't shake. I wasn't scared anymore. I was done being manipulated. As the ink dried, a strange calm came over me. It wasn't joy. Exactly, it was justice. A quiet, righteous peace that told me Harold would have approved. Afterward, I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in months. The crisp autumn air carried the faint smell of leaves, and for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally took my power back. That night, I sat in Harold's old chair and whispered, "You were right, darling. Money shows who people really are." I wasn't sure what would happen next. But one thing was certain, I wouldn't be fooled again. Tyler had chosen his path, and I had chosen mine. By the time Tyler realized what I'd done, it would be far too late. The next week, I met with my attorney to finalize the new will. It was a gray Wednesday morning, the kind that carries a stillness before a storm. The streets outside Douglas's office were slick from rain, and I could see my reflection in the window as I walked in, older, yes, but steadier. My heart wasn't racing this time. It was quiet, sure, resolved. Douglas greeted me with a soft smile. "Morning, Mrs. Whitaker. Everything's ready for your signature." I took a seat at his desk, the same one where Harold and I had sat years earlier when we drafted our first family plan. Back then, we'd been so optimistic, planning for college funds, retirement, our future. I never imagined I'd be sitting in that same chair alone, rewriting everything because of betrayal. He handed me the documents. "This is the trust for Noah and Ellie," he said, tapping the top page. "It ensures that neither parent, especially your son, can touch the funds. It'll all be held until they turn 18. I nodded. "And Jean's listed as the guardian and trustee?" "Yes," he confirmed. "You've chosen wisely. Jean's known your family for decades. She'll make sure your wishes are honored." I smiled faintly. "Jean has more backbone than most lawyers I know." Douglas chuckled softly. "That's true." I scanned the pages one last time before picking up the pen. As I signed my name, I felt a weight lift. I wasn't punishing Tyler, I was protecting my grandchildren. That distinction mattered. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about drawing a line between love and manipulation and making sure no one could ever cross it again. When I was finished, Douglas looked at me with a touch of sympathy. "Do you want me to notify Tyler officially?" I shook my head. "No. Not yet. I want him to find out on his own." He nodded. "Understood." When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was breaking open just a little, a few streaks of sunlight pushing through the gray. I stood there for a while, breathing it in. It felt symbolic, like the calm after finally weathering a long, cruel storm. That evening, I went home and poured myself a small glass of wine. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for a phone call that would hurt me. I wasn't checking messages, hoping for apologies that would never come. I was simply at peace. After dinner, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote Tyler a letter. I didn't intend to send it, it was just something I needed to get out. "Dear Tyler, I love you, and that will never change. But I can't stand by while you treat love like a currency. Your father and I raised you better than this. One day, you'll understand that money disappears, but the damage caused by greed lingers. I hope, truly, that you find your way back before it's too late." I folded the letter neatly and placed it in my dresser drawer, right beside Harold's wedding ring. The next day, I sent one final text message. My fingers hesitated for a moment before I typed, "Love should never have a price." Then I hit send and blocked his number. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I knew it was the only way to break the cycle. Tyler wasn't going to change while he still thought I was an easy target. And I wasn't going to let him use guilt as leverage anymore. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in what felt like forever. No nightmares, no tossing and turning, just quiet, steady rest. When I woke up, I felt lighter. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the things I loved again. I started volunteering at the local library, helping kids with reading programs. Their laughter, their joy, it reminded me of Noah and Ellie, and in a way, it healed something in me. I realized I didn't need to stop being a grandmother just because I'd been shut out of my family. Love wasn't confined to bloodlines, it was something you shared freely. Jean came over one evening for tea. She listened as I told her everything, from the envelope to the new will. She didn't interrupt, just nodded with understanding. "You did the right thing," she said finally. "You can't fix people who don't want to be fixed, but you can make sure they don't drag you down with them." I smiled softly. That's exactly what Harold would have said. We clinked our teacups together, and I felt a rare moment of peace. But as I washed the cups later, I found myself glancing at my phone again, habit, maybe, or hope. A part of me still longed for Tyler to call, not to argue, but just to say he understood. Yet the silence continued, stretching out like a quiet echo of the choices we'd both made. I didn't know it then, but peace rarely lasts long in a story like mine. When you stand up to greedy people, They don't walk away quietly, they come back angrier, hungrier, desperate to reclaim control. And one afternoon, as the autumn wind rattled the windows, I learned that the storm I thought I'd ended had only changed direction, because Candace came back with a new plan of her own. I didn't expect Candace to show up at my doorstep one rainy afternoon. It had been nearly 3 weeks since I'd changed my will, and life had settled into a strange kind of peace. I filled my days with volunteering, reading, and tending to the small garden Harold and I once built together. Every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about Tyler and the kids, wondering if he'd learned anything or if he still blamed me for everything that had gone wrong. But I refused to dwell on it. I'd done what needed to be done. The sky that afternoon was the color of steel, heavy with rain, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I looked through the peephole, I nearly dropped my tea. Candace. She stood there, drenched, her mascara running, her designer coat clinging to her like a wet blanket. Her hair was plastered against her face, but even soaked through, she carried that same arrogance. For a long moment, I debated whether to open the door. Every part of me screamed no, but curiosity and maybe a bit of pity made me turn the knob. "Lorraine," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk." I folded my arms. "I can't imagine what we'd have left to talk about, Candice." She pushed past me before I could stop her, dripping water all over my rug. "It's important," she said sharply. "It's about Tyler." I shut the door and faced her. "He's alive, I assume?" She glared at me. "Barely. He's miserable. He's drinking, can't keep a job, and he blames you for everything." I sighed. I'm not surprised he blames me. Taking responsibility never was his strong suit. Candace's eyes narrowed. "You think you're so noble, don't you? Like you didn't destroy your own son's life by cutting him off." I felt my jaw tighten, but I stayed calm. "I didn't destroy anything. I protected what mattered," she scoffed. "You and that stupid envelope stunt, you humiliated him. You humiliated us." "You did that yourselves," I said evenly. "I just held up a mirror." Her eyes flickered with anger. "You think you're clever, but let me tell you something, money doesn't stay locked away forever. You're not going to live forever, Lorraine. And when you're gone, Tyler will get what's his." Her words were sharp, meant to intimidate, but I just smiled, the kind of calm smile that seemed to unsettle her even more. "Maybe," I said softly. "Maybe not." For the first time, uncertainty flashed across her face. "What did you do?" I tilted my head. "If you think I'm going to tell you, you've learned even less than I thought." She stepped closer, her voice lowering. "You listen to me, old woman. If you don't make this right, I'll make sure you regret it." The threat hung in the air. I studied her so young, so desperate, so consumed by greed she didn't even realize how pathetic she sounded. I took a step forward, closing the space between us. "Candace," I said quietly, "you've already done enough damage. I think it's time you leave before you embarrass yourself any further." Her nostrils flared. "You think I'm bluffing?" "No," I said. "I think you're drowning. And the sad part is, you don't even realize you're the one who jumped in." She stared at me, trembling with fury. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Then she turned on her heel and stormed out into the rain. I stood by the door for a long moment, my pulse steady despite the adrenaline rushing through me. I'd expected anger, maybe guilt, but not this. The sheer venom in her voice told me she wasn't done. I called Jean later that evening to tell her what had happened. "She came to your house?" Jean asked, alarmed. "Yes," she was furious. Threatening even. Jean's tone hardened. "You need to be careful, Lorraine. That woman sounds unstable." "I know," I said, staring out the window at the rain-soaked street. "But I'm not afraid of her. She doesn't have power over me anymore." Still, something in my gut told me to stay alert. Candace wasn't the kind to back down quietly, not when she felt slighted. 2 days later, my intuition proved right. A white envelope arrived in my mailbox, no return address. I opened it carefully, and my stomach sank. Inside was a typed letter. "If you don't want trouble, you'll make this right. You think you're clever, but I have proof of your manipulation. You'll pay one way or another." I read it twice, my hands trembling not from fear, but anger. She was trying to intimidate me again. I called Douglas, my lawyer, and told him everything. He advised me to document it and to avoid contact. If she escalates, we'll involve the police, he said. But I wasn't going to sit back passively. The next day, I went to the local electronics store and bought a small voice recorder. I didn't plan to use it immediately, but if Candace showed up again, I'd be ready. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days later, I heard the sound of a car screeching into my driveway. When I looked out the window, there she was again, looking more desperate than before. I pressed record and placed the device on the table before opening the door. Candace didn't bother with pleasantries this time. "You think you're untouchable?" she spat. "You think you can just rewrite everything and leave us with nothing?" I folded my arms. "If you're here to threaten me again, I'd advise against it. You're digging your own grave," she sneered. "You're pathetic. An old woman clinging to power. I could ruin you if I wanted to." "Then why haven't you?" I asked calmly. She faltered, anger flashing across her face. "Because..." she started, then trailed off. That's when I knew. She had nothing, no proof, no leverage, just empty threats. Still, I let her keep talking, every poisonous word recording clearly. "Finally," I said, "I think this conversation is over. The next time you step on my property, you'll be talking to the police, not me." Candace's eyes widened as she realized she'd been outplayed. She turned and stormed out, her car tires spinning against the wet pavement as she sped away. I exhaled slowly and stopped the recording. I didn't know then that recording would later save more than just my reputation. A week later, Candace's threats turned into action. It was a Thursday morning when the knock came. I was in the middle of baking a pie apple, Harold's favorite recipe, when I heard it. 3 sharp, official knocks. When I opened the door, 2 police officers were standing on my porch. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Mrs. Lorraine Whitaker?" one of them asked, holding a clipboard. "Yes," I replied cautiously, my voice tight. "I'm Officer Daniels, and this is Officer Reed," he said. "We received a complaint against you. A woman named Candace Turner claims you've been harassing her family." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Harassing? The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, but the look on their faces told me this was no joke. "That's ridiculous," I said. "I haven't contacted her in weeks." Daniels nodded slowly. "She provided some statements and messages that seem to show you've been trying to intimidate her." I blinked. "Messages? I haven't sent her a single thing." Reed spoke up. "That's why we're here. We just need to ask a few questions." "You're not in trouble, ma'am. We're just investigating." I took a deep breath and invited them inside. My kitchen smelled of cinnamon and butter, the scent oddly comforting as I tried to steady myself. They sat at my table, flipping through some papers. Candace's words stared back at me from those pages, fabrications, twisted versions of the truth. Apparently, she'd claimed I'd been obsessively calling, sending manipulative letters, and even threatening her safety. It was all fiction. I kept my voice even. "Officers, I assure you I haven't done any of that. In fact, she came here twice. The second time, she threatened me." Reed looked up. "Do you have any proof of that?" I reached for the drawer where I'd hidden the small recorder and placed it gently on the table. "Actually," I said, "I do." Their eyebrows lifted. "You recorded her?" "Yes," I said. "The last time she came here, she said she'd make me regret not giving her money. She called me pathetic. I didn't say a word to provoke her. It's all right here." Daniels gestured for me to play it. I pressed the button, and Candace's voice filled the kitchen, sharp, angry, unmistakable. "You think you're untouchable? You think you can just rewrite everything and leave us with nothing? You're pathetic. An old woman clinging to power. I could ruin you if I wanted to." The officers listened silently, their expressions growing graver by the minute. When the recording ended, Daniels leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "Well," he said quietly, "that changes things." Reed nodded. "Thank you for keeping this, ma'am. It's clear she's the aggressor here. I nodded, relief washing over me so fast it made me dizzy. I didn't know what else to do. I just wanted to protect myself. Daniels gave a sympathetic smile. You did exactly the right thing. Don't worry, we'll take it from here. When they left, I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands were shaking, but this time not from fear, from release. The truth was finally on my side, and I had proof. 2 days later, I got a call from Officer Daniels. Mrs. Whitaker, he said, we spoke with Candace. She's been warned to stay away from you. If she contacts you again, it'll be treated as harassment. Thank you, officer, I said, my voice trembling with relief. He paused before hanging up. And ma'am, for what it's worth, you handled yourself with remarkable grace. Not many people would have thought to document that. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet kitchen, tears prickling my eyes. I whispered softly, "Thank you, Harold." Because I knew in my heart that it was his calm, steady nature guiding me through every step. Over the next few weeks, peace slowly returned. Candace disappeared from my life completely. No letters, no calls, no appearances. Tyler stayed distant, though I heard through the grapevine that things between them had officially ended. She'd taken her name off the lease and vanished. Then, one afternoon, as I was tending the garden, my phone rang. It was a court representative. They informed me that, given the harassment incident, I now qualified to request visitation rights to see my grandchildren. Apparently, someone, possibly Tyler, had denied me visitation in writing, citing family tension. But after reviewing the case, the court ruled that I was entitled to supervised visits. Supervised or not, it was a miracle. The first time I saw Noah and Ellie again, it was in a community center room, a social worker present nearby. They ran into my arms the moment they saw me, and I felt my heart break and heal all at once. "Grandma, we missed you," Noah cried, wrapping his small arms around my neck. Ellie giggled. "Daddy said you were busy. You're not busy now, right?" I smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart, Grandma's not busy anymore." For an hour, we played games, told stories, and colored pictures together. The social worker smiled quietly in the corner, clearly moved by the love in the room. When the visit ended, I kissed them both on their foreheads. "I'll see you again soon," I promised. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table, I realized that after everything, after the humiliation, the lies, and the threats, I had found a small piece of justice. Not through anger or revenge, but through truth. And just when I started to believe that peace was finally within reach, fate had one more twist to deliver. Then something unexpected arrived in the mail, a letter in Tyler's handwriting. When I opened Tyler's letter, I felt the weight of every memory we ever shared. It came on a Tuesday morning, tucked between bills and grocery flyers. The envelope was plain, no return address, no markings, but I recognized that handwriting immediately. My hands trembled as I carried it to the kitchen table. The same table where so many of our family's milestones had happened. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of what might be inside. For a moment, I thought about throwing it away. After everything he'd done, the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, I wasn't sure I could handle more pain. But curiosity and love, stubborn as ever, won out. I tore it open carefully and unfolded the paper. The letter was several pages long. The first line stopped me cold. "Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to tell you the truth." My eyes blurred as I read. He wrote about everything: the guilt, the shame, the realization that Candace had used him from the very beginning. He admitted he'd been weak, easily manipulated by her promises of a perfect life. "She made me believe you looked down on me," he wrote. "That you thought I wasn't good enough, that Dad never really trusted me." I let her words twist my heart. When she said we should ask you for money, I knew it was wrong. But I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay you back somehow. I just didn't want to lose her. I stopped there, pressing a hand to my mouth. The pain in his words was raw, real. It didn't erase what he'd done, but for the first time, I could see my son again, not the bitter man Candace had molded him into, but the boy Harold and I had raised. He went on to describe how everything fell apart after she left. He lost his job, his home, his confidence. He wrote that he'd started seeing a counselor after the police incident, and for the first time, he was learning how to take responsibility for his choices. "Mom, I've spent my whole life chasing approval from you, from Dad, from anyone who'd give it. I let my pride and insecurity turn into greed. I know I broke something sacred between us. I can't fix it overnight, but I want to try." I paused there, tears slipping down my cheeks. I had waited so long to hear those words, not for my pride, but for his soul. The letter ended with something that broke me completely. "If you'll let me, I'd like to see you. Not to ask for anything. Just to say I'm sorry to your face. I'll understand if you say no. But if you agree, maybe we could meet somewhere peaceful, somewhere that reminds us of Dad." I folded the letter and pressed it to my heart. Harold's name lingered on the page like a ghost between us. There was only one place that fit that description: the lake. That evening, I drove. There alone, the letter on the passenger seat beside me. The drive was quiet, the road lined with trees just beginning to turn for autumn. The lake had always been our sanctuary. Harold used to take Tyler fishing there when he was a boy. I could still picture them sitting side by side on the dock, laughing about nothing and everything. When I pulled into the parking area, I saw Tyler's car already there. He was standing near the water, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped. For a moment, I just watched him. He looked smaller, somehow older, worn down, but human again. He turned when he heard my footsteps. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "Hi, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. We stood there, the wind rustling the trees around us, the lake glimmering faintly under the gray sky. "Finally," he said, "I don't even know where to start." I took a deep breath. "Start with the truth." He nodded slowly. "I hurt you. I hurt Dad's memory. I let someone else turn me into something I'm not. I thought if I had money, control, or power, I'd finally be worth something. But all I did was lose everything that mattered." I swallowed hard. My voice barely a whisper. "Why, Tyler? Why didn't you just come to me? Why lie?" His eyes filled with tears. "Because I didn't want you to see how weak I'd become. I thought you'd give up on me. I thought if I acted strong, maybe I'd convince myself I was." The wind carried his words across the water, soft and broken. I stepped closer and reached out, resting a hand on his arm. "You're not weak, Tyler. You made mistakes, terrible ones, but admitting them takes strength." He wiped his eyes and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. "I don't deserve you, Mom." I shook my head gently. "You're my son. You'll always be my son. But trust, that takes time." "I know," he said. "I'll earn it, I promise." We stood there for a long time, saying little else. The silence between us was different now, not heavy with anger, but filled with something softer: regret, hope, understanding. Before we left, Tyler walked to the edge of the dock and took something out of his pocket, a small fishing lure. "Dad gave me this," he said quietly. "I kept it all these years. I don't know why." I smiled faintly. "Because some things you never really let go of." He tossed it gently into the lake. It hit the surface and disappeared beneath the ripples. "Goodbye, Dad," he whispered. We hugged before parting, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel anger when I held him. Just sadness and a fragile kind of peace. As I drove home, I thought about Harold. About how he'd always believed that people could find their way back if they were brave enough to face their own darkness. Maybe Tyler was finally doing that. I placed his letter on the mantel beside Harold's photo, where it belonged, a symbol of repentance and hope. But fate still had one final twist to deliver. The envelope wasn't done changing lives. Months later, as I organized old paperwork, I found a sealed envelope Harold had left behind. It was a chilly November morning, and the house smelled faintly of coffee and wood polish. I'd been meaning to clean out Harold's desk for years, but something in me always resisted, maybe because every drawer felt like a piece of him still alive. That morning, though, I felt ready. I went through the files one by one: old medical insurance papers, bank statements, and letters Harold had written back when people still did that sort of thing. And then, buried under a pile of yellowed folders, I found it. A small cream-colored envelope with Harold's handwriting across the front. For Lorraine to open when the time feels right. I froze. My heart beat faster as I traced the familiar cursive with my fingertips. I whispered, "Oh, Harold. What did you do this time?" I carried it to the kitchen table, the same place where I'd read Tyler's apology letter weeks earlier. The morning light streamed through the curtains, illuminating the delicate paper. I hesitated before opening it, almost afraid to disturb the calm that had finally settled in my life, but Harold's handwriting, steady and certain, pulled me in. Inside was a folded letter and a small slip of paper that looked official. I unfolded the letter first. It began just like Harold always spoke, plain, direct, full of warmth and wisdom. "My dearest Lorraine, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to sit across from you with a cup of coffee and that knowing look you always said I gave you. I hope time has been kind to you, my love. I know life has its way of breaking hearts, but I also know you've always had a way of mending them." I pressed the letter to my chest and took a breath before continuing. "I've thought a lot about the future, about Tyler, about the kids we might one day have bouncing on our laps. I know the world changes fast, and sometimes people lose their way. So, I've set aside something small, not for me, not even for you, but for the ones who will carry our name after us. If life ever tests them, I want them to have something that reminds them of where they come from." My eyes filled with tears as I reached for the small paper that had fallen from the envelope, a savings bond. Not a huge amount, but enough to matter, enough to mean something. "This bond," Harold's letter continued, "is for our grandchildren's education or whatever they may need to build their own futures. Promise me you'll give it to them when the time feels right. And Lorraine, never doubt your strength. You were always the heart of this family. If they lose sight of love, you'll be the one to bring them back." By the time I reached the end, tears were streaming down my cheeks. I could almost hear Harold's voice, steady, reassuring, full of that quiet faith he always had in people. He'd written this long before the chaos, long before Tyler's mistakes, long before any of us knew what greed could do to a family. But somehow, he had known exactly what we would need. I sat there for a long time, staring at that letter. It felt like Harold was speaking from beyond, guiding me one last time. I thought about everything that had happened, the envelope I gave Tyler, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the slow path to healing, and realized that Harold's words completed the circle. That night, I called Douglas, my lawyer. "Douglas," I said softly, "I need to update the grandchildren's trust again." He hesitated. "Of course, Mrs. Whitaker. What would you like to add?" I smiled through tears. "A bond. From Harold. He wanted the kids to have it one day." He understood immediately. "He always was a thoughtful man," he said kindly. When I went to the bank the next morning to deposit the bond into the trust, I felt something lift in me. For months, I had carried around the weight of pain and resentment, but this was love in its purest form. Not a grand gesture. Not revenge or justice. But quiet love that endured beyond life itself. I could almost hear Harold whispering, "See, Lorraine?" The answer was always love. When I got home, I sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, and watched the last autumn leaves fall. I thought about Noah and Ellie, their laughter, their tiny hands clutching mine, and smiled. Someday, when they were older, they'd know the truth. Not about the greed or the fights, but about how deeply they were loved by people who only wanted the best for them. The following week, I mailed a copy of the trust documents to Douglas for safekeeping. I thought that was the end of it. The final chapter of a long and painful story. But life, as it tends to, wasn't done surprising me. One evening, as I was finishing dinner, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was late, and I'd grown wary of unexpected calls. But when I picked it up, the voice on the other end made my breath catch. "Mom?" It was Tyler. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. "Yes, Tyler?" He hesitated. "I found something. Something of Dad's. I think it was meant for you." My heart skipped. "What is it?" "I don't know yet," he said softly. "It's another envelope. I found it in one of the old boxes from the garage." I thought maybe we could go through it together. I sat there in stunned silence, the irony not lost on me. After everything, after the envelope that had torn us apart, and the one that had healed me, there was another. Where are you? I asked finally. At the lake, he said. The kids are with me, they've been asking about you. My throat tightened. I'll be there soon. As I hung up the phone and grabbed my coat, I glanced once more at Harold's letter. The last line seemed to glow in the fading light of dusk. If they lose sight of love, you'll be the one to bring them back. And just when I thought peace had finally come, I got a surprising phone call from Tyler. Tyler's voice was soft, almost humble. When I pulled up to the lake that evening, the sky was painted in streaks of gold and rose. The same lake where Harold had taught Tyler to fish, where our family once spent carefree summers. It had always been the place where we found peace, even when the world felt heavy. Now, it was where everything was coming full circle again. I spotted them immediately. Tyler stood near the edge of the dock, hands in his jacket pockets, staring out over the still water. Noah and Ellie were nearby, skipping stones, their laughter carrying across the lake like music. For a moment, I didn't move, I just watched. Something in me ached, so much time lost. So many moments stolen by pride, greed, and pain. But right then, watching my grandchildren play and seeing my son standing alone with regret written in every line of his body, I felt that old tug of love rise up again. The kind that refused to die, no matter how much it had been wounded. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. Tyler turned at the sound and froze when he saw me. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other, unsure how to bridge the chasm between us. Then he smiled a small, uncertain smile and lifted a hand in greeting. Hey, Mom, he said quietly. Hey, sweetheart. The word slipped out naturally, though I hadn't called him that in a long time. It startled him. His eyes softened, and he motioned for me to come closer. The kids spotted me next. Grandma! Noah shouted, his little face lighting up. He ran toward me, with Ellie right behind him. They crashed into me with hugs so fierce it nearly knocked me off balance. I laughed and cried all at once, holding them tight, breathing them in like I'd been starved for air. Daddy said we could see you, Ellie chirped. We came to feed the ducks. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Well, I'm glad he brought you here. I missed you both so much. When I looked up, Tyler was watching us, his eyes glistening. He cleared his throat and said, The kids wanted to surprise you. I found something in Dad's old boxes, and I thought maybe this was the right place to talk. He gestured toward a small bench near the dock. I nodded, and after the kids ran off again to chase ducks, I joined him there. The breeze was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and lake water. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just watched Noah and Ellie play, the ripples spreading across the surface like the past widening, softening, fading. Finally, Tyler reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small brown envelope. I found this, he said quietly. It had your name on it. I hesitated before taking it, the paper warm from his hands. Where did you find it? In the garage, he said. In an old fishing box Dad used to keep his tackle in. It must have been there for years. I turned the envelope over. My name Lorraine was written in Harold's handwriting again. The sight of it nearly broke me. You didn't open it? He shook his head. No, I thought we could read it together. My throat tightened. Thank you, Tyler. For a long moment, I just held the envelope, afraid to tear it open, afraid of what it might stir up. But finally, with shaking fingers, I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, one of Harold's old notepad sheets. I began to read aloud, my voice trembling. Lorraine, if you're reading this, it means life has led you through some rough waters. I hope by now you know how strong you are. If you're ever standing at this lake again, remember this place isn't just ours, it's where lessons are passed down. If Tyler's with you, tell him I said this. No matter how far you drift, love will always find the shore. I stopped reading and looked up. Tyler was staring at the letter, his jaw trembling, his eyes glassy. He wrote this. For us, he whispered. I nodded. He must have known we'd need it someday. Tyler rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand. He was a better man than I'll ever be. I shook my head gently. He wasn't perfect. But he loved deeply. And so do you just forgot how for a while. He swallowed hard. I'm still trying to remember. You're doing better than you think, I said softly. You showed up. That's where it starts. The wind rustled the trees behind us, scattering golden leaves across the dock. For a moment, everything was quiet, peaceful. Tyler took a deep breath, then reached for my hand. His grip was firm but trembling. Mom, I can't change what I did, but I promise I'll never make you feel that kind of pain again. I want to rebuild this family for Dad, for the kids, for you. My eyes burned, but I smiled. Then let's start small. Let's just keep showing up. We sat there until the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the water in shades of amber and violet. The kids' laughter echoed behind us, and for the first time in years, it didn't sound like something lost, it sounded like something beginning again. When it was time to leave, Tyler turned to me, his voice quiet but sure. Mom, before you go, I have something for you. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out another envelope, this one crisp and white, sealed neatly. What's this? I asked, taking it from him. He smiled faintly. Just something I think you should read when you get home. I looked down at it, then back at him. Another envelope, huh? We've had quite a few of those in this family. He chuckled softly, the sound bittersweet. Yeah, but I think you'll like what's inside this one. He hugged me before I got into my car, holding on longer than he ever had before. I love you, Mom, he whispered. I love you too, sweetheart. As I drove away, I glanced at the white envelope on the passenger seat, resting in the fading light of the sunset. But before leaving that night, Tyler handed me an envelope that made my heart skip a beat. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note and an old photograph. When I got home that evening, the sky had turned navy blue, and the first winter chill was settling into the air. I placed my purse on the table and sat down with the envelope resting in front of me. It was light, just a single sheet of paper inside, maybe two, but my heart felt heavy with anticipation. For a few moments I simply stared at it, tracing my fingers along the edges. How strange, I thought, that so much of my family's story had been carried in envelopes. Each one had changed everything, some had brought pain, some justice, some redemption. And now this one came from my son. I tore it open carefully, sliding out the contents. The first thing that fell into my lap was a photograph, one I hadn't seen in decades. It was of Harold and Tyler at the lake, back when Tyler was about 8 years old. They were sitting on the dock, their fishing poles dangling over the water, sunlight catching the ripples. Harold had his arm around Tyler's shoulders, both of them laughing at something I must have said behind the camera. The sight of it hit me like a wave. My breath caught, and I pressed a hand to my chest. That moment, frozen in time, had once been so ordinary, but now it felt sacred. Proof that before all the hurt, before greed and mistakes and distance, there had been love, pure, uncomplicated love. I set the photograph gently on the table and unfolded the note. Tyler's handwriting was neat, deliberate, like he'd taken his time. Mom, when I found this photo in Dad's old tackle box, I realized how far I'd drifted from the boy I used to be. The boy in this picture didn't care about money or pride. He just wanted to make his dad proud and make his mom laugh. Somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was. I let life harden me. But you never gave up on me, not really. Even when I didn't deserve it, you still showed up. You still believed there was something worth saving in me. And because of that, I'm finally finding my way back. I blinked through tears, the words blurring. He continued, I've started working again. A steady job this time. It's not glamorous, but it's honest, and I'm proud of it. The kids are doing great, they talk about you all the time. Noah says he wants to be brave like Grandma, and Ellie wants to bake cookies just like you. I'm doing my best to raise them right, to teach them the lessons I learned too late. I can't change what happened, but I can make sure our future looks different. I don't want there to be any more secrets or resentment between by us. I could almost hear his voice as I read those lines, soft and remorseful. Then came the last paragraph, the one that undid me completely. Mom, this photo reminded me of something Dad used to say whenever we were out fishing. I never really understood it back then, but I do now. He'd say, "Son, when you cast your line, you don't control what bites you, just have to be patient enough to wait for something good to come back. I think that's what love is too. You cast it out and hope it comes back someday." And somehow, after everything, it did. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. I clutched the letter to my chest and whispered, "Tyler, you finally get it." The house was quiet, but I could almost feel Harold's presence there with me. Maybe he'd been waiting for this moment too, the day his son found his way back home. Not through inheritance or guilt, but through understanding. I stood and walked to the mantel, where Harold's photo still sat beside the one of our grandchildren. I placed Tyler's letter between them, a symbol of everything we had lost and everything we had found again. For a long while, I just stood there, letting the silence fill the space around me. Not the painful kind of silence that comes after loss, but a peaceful one, the kind that feels like forgiveness. Later that night, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the stars. They shimmered faintly over the dark horizon, the same sky Harold and I used to sit under when we dreamed about the life we'd build. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been through this journey, the hopeful mother, the broken one, the fighter, the forgiver, and I realized they had all been leading me here. I picked up the photograph again, running my thumb over Harold's smile. "You were right," I whispered. "Love always finds the shore." Somewhere out there, I hoped Tyler was sitting by his window, too, maybe looking at the same sky, maybe telling Noah and Ellie a story about their grandpa and the lessons he'd taught him. As the clock ticked softly in the background, I felt an overwhelming peace wash over me, a kind I hadn't known in years. The wounds were still there, the scars still tender, but they no longer defined me. Love did. The envelope that once symbolized betrayal had come full circle, now carrying forgiveness, understanding, and hope. I smiled, closing my eyes, imagining Harold's steady voice beside me one last time. "You did good, Lorraine." And as the sun set over the quiet Michigan sky, I knew I'd finally given my family the most priceless gift of all, grace.